G'day everyone, it's Matt Dean, the CEO of Screen Producers Australia. Today I'm with Melissa and Ryan from Factor 30 Films. G'day guys, how are ya?
Hi Matt.
Hi Matt, how are you?
Good. It's really good to see you. Look as though you're at home. You've got the, I don't know, very important painting behind you. I'm going to just switch off my, it is probably, right? And if you've been working from home the whole time, if you've been in your office, what's been happening as a day-to-day layer?
Well, this is the beautiful Hammersley Ranges behind us.
This is the Pilbara, mate. This is keeping this country afloat.
And we're working from home.
Where would the rest of Australia be without WA? There we are.
But we're working from home today, even though we have just moved into a new beautiful office down in South Fremantle. The people next door are doing renovations, so we don't want to hear these angle grinders as we're talking.
I don't know, this is a bit self-indulgent, but I remember the first time I met both of you, but Melissa, I think you had your child with you and we met at a coffee shop near around the corner from your house because you were working from home and you just had your baby, or it was very soon after.
Jessie was 2.
Yeah, it was that process though of working as best you could throughout this period. And it reminds me of a little bit of how COVID kind of, those skills of working out of cafes or the back of everywhere and need to be a bit adaptive is kind of probably set up probably a decent working practice for the rest of the nation. And we've already got it because that's what we've been doing all these times. So anyway, can you give us a little sense of what you've been working on during this period and the slate that you've got at the moment that we want to share with everyone?
So, I mean, you're right, Matt, as parents, we are used to this juggle. But I think what happened for us when COVID hit was that we were really, really fortunate that we just received development funding for a comedy drama that we'd been working on, as well as a comedy series. We'd done the writers' workshop in February.
Okay.
And then when the lockdown hit in March, it didn't really affect us because we were, in full throttle with development. So it worked to our advantage.
Can you talk about those two projects and have they been announced in any sense publicly, or are they a little bit behind the scenes at the moment?
Well, Screen West has announced the project Emerald Way, which they funded for full development of first draft script.
Right.
Which is fantastic. We now have that, which has already been pitched. We have a pitch document and a script, which is really helpful for the international market, is to have that pilot episode. We also had received alongside...
That was a series, Emerald.
Yes, comedy series.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And we'd also received development funding from Screen Australia with our co-producing partner, Film Depot, so that's Louise Smith. So we were at the final stages of completing the script and the pitch package, and we just took the opportunity to spend more time on that and give it more creative time so that we had a better project and a stronger project to pitch rather than something that was, good, but we made it excellent. So I was really happy about that.
And the last few times I've seen you in the flesh has been, I think, maybe when you've been, or at least some of them have been in Sydney doing a couple of those writers' rooms. Can you just talk about that process entirely? Are you working with writers around the country? Is it sometimes you want to be here to do that? Sometimes you've been able to do it. Is it changing the nature of how you do a room at the moment?
Well, I haven't been in a virtual room yet. So the only virtual experience I've had over these last 6 months has been a read through, a table read.
Right.
So I can't talk to what it might be like to do a writer's room virtually, but I do have to say there's nothing like being in that room and feeling, the excitement of ideas come forth and the way people bounce off, those ideas that bounce back and forth. There's something very exciting about sort of the energy in the room.
Yeah.
And certainly on the table read that I was on, it was fabulous. And especially for me being in Perth and everybody else being in Sydney, it was great because I could be there. But there was just that little, it's that little thing that you can't quite
put your finger on. I know. And I think we're all the same. We all want to be with people through creative processes, but even just connection layers are really impossible
Yeah.
or not impossible, but they're very difficult or challenging in different ways because of technology. Did you also, can I just check, there was a various support packages that came through from WA, it seemed, for the industry. I don't know if you were directly beneficial of that, benefiting from that, but are there some things you've observed about the way that WA itself handled, the response to COVID? We've talked to a few other people about this, but I'm interested in seeing your lens on it.
Yeah, we did receive one of the Screen West support packages, and Screen West were amazing. They were very quick to move, and they moved in a fashion that enabled the agency to support below the line technicians as well as above the line, but principally production businesses and producers. So we were lucky to get a small package in that regard, but enormously impressed with how quickly the agency moved. And the fact that it tried to support, as many, industry practitioners as it could. So that was certainly great for us to get that little fillip, and allowed us to
keep moving.
Keep moving. I mean, as Melissa said, we've spent most of the COVID period, which we've experienced very differently here in the West to certainly Melbourne, but New South Wales as well. Our lockdown was brief, and certainly not as prohibitive as it has been in other places. So we've been extraordinarily lucky in that regard.
And you two, given that you both work together and live together, and share a family and a business together, I would have thought your lockdown's like a day-to-day lockdown anyway, right? You can't escape each other at the best of times. So it wasn't much of an impact.
But look, it can be though. We have 2 school-age children. We'll drop them off at school, and you get a phone call an hour later saying, Jessica has a headache, has to come home, and then suddenly you've either got a kid in the office or you're working at home. So those kind of disruptions are things we've learnt to work with. It doesn't bother us. Both of our kids' arrivals corresponded with productions. We had 2 productions that literally had creches for Melissa and Baby, where we were in full flight producing films. So, that's been, 15 years of our life. So we've kind of got a head around that part of our industry.
Yeah, that's actually, maybe I know that it seems like breakthroughs, and there are in a narrative sense, maybe, but what you're talking about is something that you've probably been designing in the way you've been working to be adaptive and coping with all of the pressures of parenting, motherhood, fatherhood, all the rest of it in a way. Do you think, it's nice to have that story actually that's been going on for a little while. And yes, there's probably been problems and we need to kind of address on other environments, but I guess that's the benefit of being the producer, isn't it? You get to decide some of these things if you're affected, and that's good learning.
Well, and it's good. Look, and it's happened in the last few years. It's good to see the industry evolve, and people be more accepting working mothers and trying to put in structures and systems that allow, women in our industry to stay involved. It's really, really hard, and we've got a lot better at it, and we've got to go further. But I can certainly recall at least one of our productions crew coming upstairs to where the office was, and there was a cot with a baby in it, and more than a few eyebrows raised.
We had actually set up a parental room, so any crew who wanted to bring their kids in could.
Which who was this, Mel?
This was on Blame.
Yeah, so this is 10 years ago now. This is baby number 2, Jessica.
Okay.
So there were lots of key heads of department at that time who had kids, and we wanted to ensure that those professionals who are at the top of their game were still working. So we provided an environment that if they wanted to bring their kids to work, they could.
Brilliant. Worth us celebrating that. I know it's a bit of a detour, we hadn't, but I just think that's great. And it reminds me, because there's been, bits of not particularly great news necessarily, depending on where you sit in the industry recently, but there was a piece that came out from Screen Australia that Joe Werner was fronting as the chair of, basically the gender equality measures had been working, and there were just changes that were very evidentially, be able to be pointed to say that things were changing and for the better. So it was good. Yeah, sorry. Anything like let's just also just think about what Factor 30 is doing. You've still got films in the title of the company, but you are definitely TV, and you've been doing some doco stuff. So give me a sense. Do you have a picture about where you want the actual business to be? I mean, I think of you as feature film people, but that you know there's changes afoot. So let's just talk about what is going on for the company.
So we have always been genre agnostic, and we've also
and platform agnostic.
platform.
Oh, just agnostic.
And I think even more so, it's important that we are expanding our business to television. And I say expanding, but we've always done TV. And the first 12 years of my career was exclusively in television. But when I moved back to Western Australia, it was very difficult to get TV up here. Yeah. And we diversified into film, but then we became known as feature filmmakers, which has a great irony in it, because it was a learned thing for us is to move into film, because we were always TV.
Yeah, it's worth reminding people, and it is the challenge also of structurally, I feel like there's some changes that are going on, right? That is about emphasising the television format, the serial format that's to do with streaming. There's a sort of a deprioritisation that's coming from the announcements around feature film with, you know, various impacts for people. The risk, I think, is that impacts different people differently, and communities that are built around and maybe having more. You can talk about the challenge of working in television from WA. I think that's true of most parts of Australia, other than probably Sydney and Melbourne, unless you have a big investment, such as the Heights from the ABC in the market with Matchbox in Perth. But otherwise, there isn't the same level of infrastructure, perhaps, or there may be the same relationships. Do you want to just talk about the problems?
Well, I mean, traditionally, late 80s through the 90s, WA was largely known for children's television.
Yeah.
And
had some great producers and companies working.
Yeah, and there was a regular pipeline of TV projects happening in WA and telemovies.
And I mean, and children's is being made right now. You know, the second series of Itch is in the field. They're shooting. They're in production now. I mean, we might, Matt, get to where children could be heading shortly when we talk about the mooted changes, you know, that the feds have recently announced. But children's has always been important to Western Australia because, you know, right now you've taken daylight saving. We haven't. We're 3 hours behind on the clock.
Yep.
We're 4 hours.
Yeah.
It's 4 or 5 hours flying to Sydney or Melbourne. You know, adult drama in metropolitan Perth has always been problematic unless it's very site or culturally specific, because there's the difficulty in getting the actors here and the volume of cast required. Yes. Whereas children is largely predicated on unknowns. So that is something we've been able to do here. The adult drama that in recent years has been made in the West, television adult drama, has been made in the regions. And it doesn't matter if you're in Broome, Kununurra or the Goldfields. You know, if you're in the East, you're in Broken Hill or wherever, you're out of town. You've had to move a cast, you've had to move a crew. So TV's always been a little problematic in, you know, cast-related and other cost-related issues.
And technology. And that just shouldn't exist anymore. That we can upload and Sydney can view it first thing. You know, they can view it at 9 a.m. the next morning. Yeah. It just shouldn't have this sort of issues that, in my mind, it's a mental block rather than
I agree. And the good thing about this sort of stuff is probably, I mean, we talked a bit about the desire to be in person, but the ways of doing business, the way of keeping connected. Yes, we all want to get together at times, but there is a way we're sort of thinking differently about how communication works and the speed at which we can operate and see each other doing this sort of stuff, right?
Well, I mean, there's only so many Zoom meetings I think you can do at any given time. And I think at peak COVID lockdown, most of us had enough. But I mean, you mentioned that we often catch up with you when we're in Sydney for meetings. And if we come for a conference, we'll stay on top and tail it, see as many people as we can. Or if we went over for work stuff, we'd do the same. I mean, you talked about writers' rooms. We've done those in Sydney. We did one on a project, you know, 2 years ago where the broadcaster wanted to participate. So we went to them.
Yes.
that's the two of us there for 4 or 5 days, airfares, accommodation, per diems, whoever's looking after the kid at home. So, you know, while Melissa is correct to say there's a great energy being in a room, I guess what we've all learnt in this short period of time is there's certain stuff we can do remotely, and for us, bluntly, at a cost saving, which would, you know, which would be valuable to us.
Yes. Is there a risk that there's an expectation that, I mean, there's a behavioural change that's positive out of some of these things, perhaps of just breaking things down, but is there a risk that there is, we don't want you to go with the expense. We're not going to fund that layer of physicality around some things. We're happy for you to do things that are not involving the kind of having to pay for things to come over, because there's always been a challenge around making sure that companies are well resourced to do travel, for example. Is there a risk that people are going to go, oh, don't worry about the travel anymore, just do your Zooms? And everyone go, oh, that's not really how you can operate once we can move.
I hope not. I mean, I hope whoever's making the decisions with regard to the spend, obviously producers, if it's screen agencies, if it's development money, broadcasters, I think, you know, wise minds need to prevail, and the best decisions need to be made to get the correct result. And sometimes that is travel. Yes. You know, and selfishly, again, there are going to be occasions when we need to get on a plane because meeting you and then half an hour later meeting somebody else, it's, you know, we can block out a day when we're in Sydney, but if we're here, there are real world things that kind of have to be taken care of. Kids, as you've mentioned, but just for instance, now, I mean, we're in production, we're in post-production on a documentary. Yes. You know, we're in a window, right?
Talk about what you're EPing at the moment, and you've got some projects. Anything else you want to talk about? I just want to make sure you've got all of the projects you've got out that you can talk about on the table. I know there's some you can't.
Well, I guess a step back is we've got a development slate, which is part feature film, part, let's call it television, but, you know, that includes streamers. It's largely drama, it's largely scripted, but there is some factual.
And comedy.
Definitely comedy. We're probably leaning more towards television and streamers than film, and that's simply because film is really, really hard to finance.
Yeah.
And the types of films we make, they're low budget, they're crafted, they're often working with first-time directors, and the market for those types of projects has completely fallen away. And I mean the box office or the theatrical market. The festival market is exceptionally strong for those types of films.
Yes.
But in order for us to finance them, we can't put our own money into them anymore, as much as we love them.
Yes. Can you maybe then, given that, Melissa, the impact that's already happening in the market, can you just look? It's an opening to have a bit of an impact about the government's changes and what that might mean for feature film more broadly, and any other comments you've got about that?
Well, I think it will severely impact low budget feature films. It severely impacts independent producers.
Kind of where this market in Australia is. It's low. I don't know where you say low budget. I'm not sure what you mean exactly, but anything
under 2.5.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, but more broadly, I'd argue anything under 5 or 7 is you know, in a lot of trouble as well with regard to the mooted changes to both where the offset's going to sit, the inclusion of production company overheads and these things.
Yeah. I think it will be more severely impacted to a $5 million film than it will to a $2.5 million film.
Yes.
But this also flows into feature docs. Yes. And the project that we're working on at the moment is a 2x1 hour for ABC, but it also has a feature film delivery, which we're doing for festivals. And this film, had we decided to use the offset, it sits in that, you know, on the margins of that bracket. It wouldn't get made. And this is a film that is really topical. The subject matter is so important. It's about voluntary assisted dying. And these stories aren't going to have an opportunity to be made.
So, presumably you're talking about something that isn't hitting a threshold yet of offset. So and you're probably in a PEP area or whatever, but then now we've got this challenge where PEP dried up for these for docos, or that was going through a challenge anyway, Screen Australia, and if the legislation goes through as it's being proposed to go to $1 million, there's a huge amount of range for documentary in that bucket, particularly it's actually a sweet spot for financing really interesting stories.
Look, I don't know the figures, but I would argue, or I would imagine at least, the greater majority of feature documentaries probably fall under $1 million and above $500,000. So they're in an awkward place where they don't get PEP, and if the changes come in, they don't get the offset.
They've also, a lot of them rely on the Gallipoli clause too. Some of them.
Yeah. Sorry, but I guess there's devastation. You can hear it in our voices and the way we're, feeling about it. There's just a great loss. And if there's anything we can do to mitigate what the policy changes are, we're 100% behind SPA if that's something that you're going to advocate for.
I mean, my frustration, Matt, in that regard is it's a space where newer filmmakers get a break, where people take a punt because the budget is low. And it's where some of our very best established documentary filmmakers with extraordinary track records are working, because they take on passion projects. It takes a lot of time for them to get them up. They're often not market driven, so the money's not there. So I have a real fear. I mean, and I'm a great lover of documentary. It's an irony I've not made a great deal, but I watch a heap. It's my real passion in our industry. Australian stories being told in that way. And of all the suggested changes that have been recently announced, this one and the changes to the children's area just leave me very cold.
Yeah.
And I think because we are a different type of screen culture in Western Australia, we're predominantly an industry of independent filmmakers. Those policy changes affect us far more than they affect other production companies around, in the rest of Australia. So taking away the production company overhead as part of the offset severely impacts our ability to survive between projects and or survive in general.
Yeah, we know we've been on different calls and there's been chats at different points. So there's a range, and just to be transparent, there's a range of conversations. We're pulling together a lot of information about the impacts and then be presenting that in a coherent and sensible way to government, so they can sort of just see that there are. And I think that some of the things that are being considered here haven't mitigate the costs of those things, or the unforeseen impacts are probably not as fully understood. So I think there's what you're just identifying are the three major areas. It's a training layer that actually is sat in all of low budget scripted, certainly new ways of getting stories out through documentary, and children's is actually a really important training layer as well for a lot of people in different areas. So it's kind of that if we take away that opportunity piece, what is going on, and also if we are thinking about the impacts, we've doing a bit of surveying at the moment, and we'll no doubt we've got to demonstrate what's going on to government from all of the businesses. But you'd have to think that businesses that are smaller are going to be impacted from some of these things more. And what you're identifying is that smaller businesses are sitting in different parts of the country, including WA. So that's I think that's a logical outcome that probably people who can just see what's going through is going, okay, that's going to be a difficulty. Is there, I don't know if the WA industry, particularly, well, maybe this is the Screen West, we're active in the discussions with government, I would have thought, in the lead up to this, and because I think that, I don't know if WA put in a submission, the actual agency, but I'm interested in what the agency and others are doing at the moment. There's a lot of conversation in response, but there's a bit of conversation about infrastructure and, trying to, I think it was a piece of work to look at an opportunity to put people and employ people across the state. And a studio has been mooted and very, very forwardly being discussed as an opportunity. Tender process is out. There's also, I think there was concerns that when the money that the government was suggesting for, or is announced for international films, was coming through, 400 million over 7 years, that a state like WA that doesn't have a major studio would be missing out on some of that opportunity. what are you like? Are you getting a sense of where that's at the moment, and whether it's going to be a salvation for the industry in WA, or how are you viewing it?
There's probably a couple of different layers there. I mean, many people listening to us or watching us would be aware, others won't. Our state government has run an expression of interest process with regard to screen industry infrastructure, so studio and other necessary, related infrastructure. That process has closed, so the government is now reviewing the submissions it received. My understanding of the timeline is early New Year, whether it's end of January, early February, they will announce where they're at. Something is happening. Something will happen, Matt, I think is the blunt reality of it. Our Premier has announced I think it's $2 billion with a B infrastructure commitment over the next handful of years, partly as a COVID response, but just in general with regard to jobs and growth, as governments love to say. So as a part of that commitment, they've identified the screen industry. So something will come of it.
It's great, actually, that they've done that. That it's not all sort of thinking. It's the arts layer is. So it reminds us actually that WA has got a rich history through Lottery West and government approaches that they want a blooming arts industry in its broadest sense, including a screen industry. So that's positive.
Absolutely. I mean, the trick is now that we get something that is fit for purpose, that they appropriately consult with industry experts, and we get a facility or facilities, who knows, that does what it says on the box. It's also important, I think, certainly for producers like Melissa and myself, that it's accessible to smaller independent productions. I mean, often what happens with large studios that have had large amounts of money spent on them is, the price point to get in is cost prohibitive to the greater majority of work that the producers locally in the area make. So if studio infrastructure allows WA to compete for the bigger international projects, fantastic. That would be a boon for local film technicians, and that would allow us to grow our crew base. That's a fantastic result. But it'd also be great if, the next time we make a film, and we made I Met a Girl 18 months ago, and we had to struggle to find appropriate production offices and homes for art department and costume. We ultimately did, but it'd be great if we had purpose-built infrastructure we could go into that we could afford on a film of that size.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's really important, that the ecology is built in a thoughtful way, because there's risks associated with this that you're getting at, which is essentially sometimes, and maybe I'm saying more than you are, but the infrastructure starts to take over as the piece, when in fact that's a facilitator of an industry to be able to be stronger and better. It's not the destination, it's a facilitation of the things we want to see, and that's probably what we want to make sure is having a healthy creative industry isn't just relying on those big productions. We've always talked about the nature of this industry is built on the back of small businesses taking on some risks and building intellectual property and being able to kind of keep that layer going, because that'll keep the protein in the industry, as well as you want the sugar hit occasionally from big shoots like we see in a few places. So is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure we'd mentioned today? I'm conscious of you've got a very busy, look, day-to-day life is busy anyway, but you're probably itching to get actually one of your shows, well, apart from the fact you're shooting at the moment, up and going. And I don't know if you're sort of waiting on a number of decisions at the moment, or where you're sitting in the process of getting action on the next, I don't know what you imagine might be the first thing on the blocks.
We are waiting on an announcement on a project which will go into production next February. So that announcement will happen next month. So we can't tell you anything more than that, but it's very exciting.
Oh, come on, let's just do it. No one's. Okay, that is exciting. And would you imagine that's in production this year, or is it going to wait till next year to start shooting?
Yeah, so it'll go into production next year, and I've been invited onto that project. So
not ours to announce, mate.
Oh, damn it. Okay, well, that's exciting. It's good.
I mean, and we're in a great place with the documentary. Again, Melissa and I are producing the documentary, but it's for Virgo Productions. Kathy Henkel, long-standing, very well-regarded, well-credentialed documentary filmmaker. She is writing, directing and producing with her daughter, Sam Lara, a fantastic emerging filmmaking talent here in the West. And as Melissa said, it's about voluntary assisted dying and this remarkable story they're telling about Laura, Kathy's mum, Sam's grandmother, and the course she went down to end her life early. A cut went to the ABC this week. I'm expecting some notes from the fantastic Stephen Oliver soon. Stephen, if you're watching this, you should be watching the cut. And we're really near...
Well, only one positive notes. No.
And we're near picture lock on that. And that's been fantastic working on that, to be physically doing something during COVID, and great to be working with Stephen and the ABC, who have been amazing. Really good to work with.
Good stuff. We should give a shout out to all the broadcasters, and I dip in and out of these things, that they've, and occasionally they've been on our takeaway series, but they have been very stoic. It's been very challenging, I think, at the ABC, particularly during a period of dealing with a number of the cuts that have effectively come through in different departments and others. So, you know, it's a nice way to give a shout out to those guys.
Well, sorry, Matt, just on that, you talked about various things earlier. This project is a result and part of the way the ABC responded nimbly to the onset of the pandemic as well. This received its funding through the Fresh Start initiative, where the ABC was able to repurpose some internal funds and either develop or help things physically go into production. We're a beneficiary of that. So, yeah, I mean, given all the pressures the ABC's under, that they were able to do that. And we're making a show because of it. It's great.
Yeah, I thought that was a really, look, it was money that was able to be leveraged in some ways to get out the door for the ABC, and assist the industry immediately. You know, who knew what would come of it? It's really great news that good things are coming of it. You know, so look, that's just great. All right, and look, in terms of travel, you know, I think you've gradually opened up your borders to let people in. I know that it's happening all over the place. We are optimistic, of course, that we'll be able to see you on the East Coast sometime. But I'm, of course, as most of us who get a chance to travel the country and engage, we've missed seeing the WA community recently at the film festivals that are happening. And I do hope we get to see you soon. Screen Forever Gold Coast, February. That would be a good time to see you. And
we'll be in production.
Oh no! God.
And by all reports, our border will still be hard, so we can leave, but we've got 2 weeks quarantine on when we come home.
So, you know, it's a blessing and a curse, this hard border, and it's fabulous that we can wander around freely and not feel the effects of COVID. But, you know, the downside is, if we wanted to take that trip to Screen Forever, we then have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks on return.
So we're going to need to see what changes over the period. And I'm, of course, optimistic that certain things will change post some elections in different parts of the country. But yes, look, until we do that, I'm good that you're in production anyway, so that's a good thing. I look forward to seeing you next time we do. And good luck with everything you're doing. You're such a great couple. And the company always does amazing work. So onwards and onwards for you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to SPA. Please keep doing the great things that you're doing.
Fight the good fight.
It's a bit of an uphill on some of this, but we will not be giving up.
No, we can't.
We appreciate everything.